Brilliant. Thank you very much, Trent. Pleasure to meet everyone here. So yes, I'll quickly just share some slides with you to start off with, and hopefully you can all see that in just a second. And that'll take kind of 10, 15 minutes or so. And then I'll move on to the actual platform itself and have a bit of a quick run through around that. So you get an idea of what you'd be dealing with if it's something you're looking to bring on board to your security portfolio. So first off, we need to kind of understand the problem that many organizations are seeing today. And I would say that the end goal for a lot of you guys is to stop data breaches from happening as much as you possibly can. But unfortunately, they are still happening on a near daily basis, and people's data is being stolen. We've got well-known breaches, including we've got Adobe, LinkedIn, eBay, for example, and there's lots of different type of data that's being stolen from there, whether that be PDFs, spreadsheets, but nearly all of them have credentials that are being involved in those data breaches. And those three data breaches you see on the screen now resulted in around about 500 million records that were stolen. And when you've got over 80% of breaches occurring due to stolen credentials, the importance of understanding whether your credentials are compromised cannot be emphasized enough. Often when these data breaches occur as well, credentials and other sensitive information is put up for sale on the dark web. And with the majority of organizations having been affected in some way, understanding what information threat actors have on a continuous basis is crucial to the security of really any organization. So let's take an example. If you wanted to perform any function online, whether it would be sending something abroad using a freight organization, maybe you're trading on the markets, you're doing online shopping, or using some form of online service, you're going to be presented with a login page very similar to the one you see on here. Now, if we take, for example, Bob here works for a power plant and has identified a faulty part within the power plant that he needs to ship off back to the manufacturer. Bob requires the use of a freight organization who are asking him to sign in. So he inputs his credentials into here using his work email address and the password pencil. The courier pick up the part, take it back to the manufacturer fix the part and send it back to Bob, and Bob then has hit the part fixed, and the freight company have done their job absolutely fine, no issues whatsoever. However, 6 months later, the freight company get breached and Bob's data is now stolen. Now, Bob, not really following best practices, uses that same password you see on the screen there, so pencil, for his work emails, and his company operates on a once yearly password change policy. But the hackers now have access to not only his password, but also they know where he'll work based on his email domain. And with this information, threat actors can easily access Bob's emails and have access to the sensitive information he has in his email address. However, if Bob had enabled multi-factor authentication for his work email, then this, of course, should not be a problem for him. Threat actors would fall at the first hurdle because they would be prompted to enter an MFA code, which they wouldn't be able to provide. However, where there's money to be made, hackers will most likely find a way. And something to note is that APIs do not require multi-factor authentication to begin talking with an internet service. If you have an API key, you can access the service. So, normally what you would do as a user is you would put in your username into the website, which would then send the request off to the service itself. Then you do the same thing with your password, and then the service will then come back to you and say, actually, I need your multi-factor authentication code, which you can then provide. However, if you're setting up an API link between whatever an automated tool that you're using. And if we take Vinny Troyer on the right here, who said, I am officially impressed and confused. There is no way someone hacked my Twitter account, guessed a random password, and bypassed my multi-factor authentication key. How are these tweets going out? So Vinny's Twitter account had been hacked and somebody was sending out tweets, but he had absolutely no idea how that was happening because he was using a unique password and had multi-factor authentication enabled. But what had happened was that when he had linked his website that he was using on a web hosting service with his Twitter account, so he could have the feed on his website, the web hosting service got breached about 6 months prior, and somebody had trawled through that data and had gone through and found the API key that was linking his Twitter account to his website, and they then used that to start sending out tweets to his account and basically start just really rubbishing his name. And the guy's probably quite infamous anyway in the kind of infosec Twitter area, if anybody is aware of that. But it's something that was really quite interesting. But that, of course, is not to say that multi-factor authentication isn't worth having. Cybersecurity is all about layers. You don't just stop at having a password. You don't just stop at having multi-factor authentication. It's about having those layers, because you're not just going to have a front door closed without a lock, for example. So what is Tritium? In short, Tritium is a dark web credential mining service that allows your company to understand where the potential threats lie within the dark web and gives you the tools to combat against this. The process is split up into 4 stages. So you've got your discover stage, which is where Tritium detects data breaches and compromised credentials being traded on the dark web as fast as possible using a combination of technology and people. And then it begins to triage that information. So it identifies and determines the risk value. That is to say, assigning each user with a relevant score determined by the associated risk. It then goes on to inform, so provides simple but meaningful information to non-technical audiences, and then finally respond, allowing organizations and users to respond quickly. And then that process allows your company to both quickly and efficiently determine the risk based on the information that's available on the dark web and implement the necessary remediations. And the way Tritium does this is, in the background, it finds billions of user credentials being pulled from closed forums and dark markets. You may be aware of some free tools out there like Have I Been Pwned? And that's often seen as the gold standard in breach alerting. And they have around about 600 breaches that they check against, whereas Tritium, on the other hand, is looking at over 9,000. That data is then intelligently cleaned through an ingest pipeline, and to make sure it's new and fresh, basically, there aren't any existing duplicates. It then matches who it thinks the data belongs to, and starts running analysis. All Tritium needs to do in order to do this is just your domain names. It doesn't require any agents. It's completely agentless, and it just requires your domain names, and it will go out and start finding that information. And then finally, Tritium determines the credentials most likely a threat based on previous observations, and then assigns them a score. And that score ranges from an info score all the way up to critical, which I'll run through in a bit more detail once we get onto the platform itself. Once that process has been completed, then you'll begin to see the outputs on your end. And a lot of other tools don't do this, but it's key to understanding the origin of the data leak. Now, Tritium will be able to tell you where that data has come from and why it came up with the risk scores it did. You'll be able to have an overview of all the impacted users, as well as those who are most at risk. And one of the big challenges with this data is making sure that everything is validated. And what will happen is when Tritium, let's say Tritium will find some data associated to, call it a Barbara Beard, that used to work in the organization 2 years ago, but she left. So prior to setting Tritium up, the team will actually ping mail servers, query Active Directory, maybe CSV files, and it enables it to verify the active email addresses that you have. So you're not seeing a load of out-of-date information that isn't necessarily relevant to you. It's also very important that Tritium doesn't circulate passwords internally. Not only would it be a GDPR or PII nightmare, but it would put the end user, if we took Bob from earlier in the power plant, for example, in a very difficult position. If an admin who was looking after the Tritium platform turned around to Bob and said, look, Bob, we know you used the password pencil for your freight organization, so for your part that you send back to the manufacturer, when you input that into the freight organization's login page, are you using the password pencil anywhere else? Bob could then turn around and say, yes, I am using that somewhere else. I'm actually using it in my bank account, and I've just checked my bank account and there's no money in there anymore. And I'm accusing you of stealing my money because I know for a fact you have that password. So it can really put quite a strain on organizations and their admins, and having almost a bit of a conflict of interest there. But at the same time, it's incredibly important to show that Tritium knows what the passwords are to the right people in order to validate whether or not they're actually risky. Tritium therefore has the ability for you as an admin to push the passwords down securely to the end user without you ever seeing the password. And then the end user can then feed that back to you whether or not that information is correct and if the password is still being used, and then allows you to step in and provide the proactive defenses, such as ensuring that password vaults are being used, you're using multi-factor authentication, things like that. Okay, so hopefully you should all see the platform here now. So I mentioned earlier on that there are multiple different risks, that kind of risk levels that will be associated. And you can see these risks here. And there are 6 stages. So I mentioned that it ranges from information to critical. So starting with informational, that's when Tritium has gone onto the dark web and has identified an email address on the dark web that has been discovered in a data breach. Now, the information there is not necessarily that risky to you. However, it is worth noting that if a threat actor has found an email address, a work email address that's been found in a data breach, maybe associated with something like LinkedIn, they'll be able to say, well, hold on a minute, we know that that email address is associated with LinkedIn. We can send that email, a phishing email, to try and get access to their company, and we'll brand that email up as if it's from LinkedIn, saying, please reset your password, please click on this link, and then the next thing you know, they've got access to everything. So the risk is actually quite limited. It needs to be very targeted for that information to be useful to a threat actor, but at the same time, it's worth you knowing all the same. Then finally, next up, you have the low risk, where you have found, where Tritium has found the email address and a password hash. So in other words, saying that there's an encrypted password associated to an email address that's been found on the dark web. Now, password hashes or encrypted passwords are mathematically impossible to reverse engineer. However, there are ways for threat actors to brute force their way into cracking passwords using something called rainbow tables. Now, rainbow tables, for those unaware, is very much just filling out, basically somebody just runs a script where it just pulls through as many combinations of letters, words, numbers as possible. And it's incredibly resource intensive, so it's quite difficult to generate the necessary passwords, especially if you've got a unique one. It's going to be very difficult to be reverse engineered. But if you're using a simple password, something like password !1 or something like that, they'll quite easily find that, because they'll put it into there and they'll be able to brute force that, assuming people are using the same authentication method or encryption method. Then you move up to medium risk, and that's when Tritium has found 2 instances of the same email and same password hash that's been found across 2 separate services. What this means is that the user is using the same password across multiple different services, and you can see that because the same password hash has been found. And that's assuming that the password hash is the same encryption method has been used across multiple different services, and you'll get the same result on the other side. Next up, you have high, and high risk is when you have a password that has been cracked and has been identified on the dark web. So someone's used the rainbow table and has found out what the password is and then has cracked it. Then you have very high, where there's a plain text password that's been found on the dark web. And then finally critical, where there's multiple instances of plain text passwords where there's the same password being used across multiple different services. The rest of the dashboard provides you with very simple information, and it's just a good overview. So you have your email credentials breakdown. So as we can see here, you've got your email and password, or just your email with a hash. You've got your risk levels, which I was talking through just now. And then you have your email address verification status, which I'll just go into in just a second. Then we move over to the alerts tab on the left-hand side there. So the alerts tab allows you as an admin to have a look. You've got your alert overview at the top there, which is another way of just showing the information that's on the dashboard. And you can then start to run through exactly all the users who are interested or who are of interest to you. Now, you might see on the left-hand side here, you've got verified and rejected or pending. Now, that is in relation to any email addresses that are currently in, the mail server or aren't in the mail server. So I mentioned earlier on Barbara Beard, for example, she left the organization 2 years ago, and the email address was removed from the mail server. Tritium then queried that, saw that it was rejected, and then has given you that information. So you could then filter that out and say, actually, I don't want to see that information. It's not relevant to me. I only want to see the verified email addresses on the platform. And then as we move across, we can see we've got Graham here. You can see which domain it's associated. We've got his risk level here, which is critical, and then a risk score associated to him. But we want to drill into him in a bit more detail, understand where the data has come from, understand exactly what he's been doing, what passwords have been found on the dark web. And we've got a risk tree which we can associate with Graham here. So if we just talk through the risk scores here, or the risk tree, so I'll start from the bottom and we'll work my way up. So we can see we've got two emails with password hashes are found that's relating to a low risk score. We've got private here, which I'll move on to in just a second, and we've got Forbes that we know he's put his details into, and a password hash has been found. Then we move up to critical, where we've got another private one there, and then we've got Mac forums, private again, and Dropbox. And what we're seeing here is that there's a password hash has been found, the password has been recovered and has been broken, the password has been reused and is now available on the dark web. But we can drill into the actual data breach in a bit more detail. So we can see in here, well, what happened in that data breach? When did it happen? So we can see it happened in 2012. We can see the total number of records that were found on that breach, and there's a bit more information available to you around the breach that happened. I mentioned earlier on that you as an admin would never actually see what the end user's passwords were. The only thing that you would actually see is how strong that password was. And we can see in this case that Graham had used quite a strong password, which is great to see. He's using his initiative to create a strong password. However, he's fallen into that trap of he's created a strong password, but we know he's reusing it in other areas. Now, private, on the other hand, you will not get any of that information. The closest information you'll get is when the breach happened. Now, this relates to any instances where there are maybe gambling or dating websites or religious websites where Graham has put in his work email address into those websites, not really following best practices, but it's worth knowing from that perspective. So you as an admin can drill into that detail, understand what's happening with Graham, and you can do that to every single user that you want to have a look into there. And then, of course, you'll have to alert Graham. However, if you're implementing some form of user awareness training, sending an email out to Graham saying, hi, Graham, your passwords have been breached and we want you to give us some information around this. Please, can you click on this link? If any user awareness training is being put into place, whether you're using common products like KnowBe4, for example, then they will probably go, hold on a minute, this is kind of some urgency involved here. They're talking about passwords. There's a bit of a scare tactic involved. They're asking me to click on a link. That for a lot of people, that'll throw up some red flags. So what you can do is you can send out an advanced notification, and this will just give you some information around, yes, who is threat status who own Tritium wants to send you something. Please keep a lookout for it. Please do click on this link, and you can send that from your own IT department so that it makes sense for people to actually click on the link and they understand what's happening. You can do this as a bulk action as well, so it doesn't have to be done as an individual instance. So we can do the same thing. We can highlight everyone. You can see that everybody's email address has been included in there. We can send that advanced notification across. And again, we can just copy all those email addresses into the clipboard and put it straight into the email that you're going to be sending out. We would recommend normally to put this into the blind copy section. We don't really want people to be talking about their passwords that have been breached internally. So doing it as a blind copy hides that fact and just really keeps everything as secure as possible. And then that email can be sent out. And then you can send the alert out to every single person as a bulk action as well. Now, I've already sent Graham an email earlier on just before we jumped on this webinar session, so we can actually see things from his perspective. Sorry, I'm just realizing I got my calendar up there. So this is the email that Graham would have received from Tritium, and it's saying, you've been sent this email because Elliot Wilkie from Threat Status would like you to take a look at some information that's been found. Please click on the link below and feed back any information. So once Graham clicks on this link down here, it should be then taken to his own personal dashboard called the My Data section. And what this does, once he clicks on Get Started, he'll be able to come through and he'll get some preliminary information, just a bit of an overview around what's been found. So we can see that there's been 6 sources of information, 4 with plain text passwords, 4 with password hashes, and 6 with his email address. And that lines up to that risk tree that I was mentioning earlier on and went through earlier on. So we know for a fact that Graham, having seen his risk tree, does indeed have 6 instances there. So it's the same information that's being pulled across. Once Graham clicks on the Get Started tab, he'll be taken over to the awaiting review here. And you can see at the top there, we have the Mac forums, which relates to, we've got the year of the breach, how many records were leaked, and the data source, for example, and then the password analysis, how strong was that password. Once Graham clicks on there, you can see the password exactly of what he used, and you can then make a decision based on that about, well, right, okay, am I using this password, or is this an old password, or maybe he doesn't even know. He'll then be prompted with this dialog box here. There's a timeout section, or he can hide it and he'll be presented with this dialog box. And I cannot click out of this box. Graham will not be able to click out of it. He must answer this question. Now, assuming he didn't want to say, he does have that option. Now, that's just so people have a bit of an out. Maybe they're not comfortable sharing that information out there, especially when it's in relation to something that's private. But he might be able to turn around and say, yeah, actually, I do have an account with Mac Forums, and that is the password that I'm using. And then he can then say, yes, I do use this password on a corporate system. And then that gets logged as an incident on the Tritium portal, which you can then have a look at. And you as an admin will then also be able to see that as an email that would come through. Now, I mentioned earlier on about private sections, and we can see one here, for example, and we can see this was the one that we saw earlier when that was the data breach happened in 2011, but we can get a bit more information about what's happened. So we can see the total number of records that were leaked. So in this case, it was around 40 million. And then he can actually see what the data source was. So in this case, it was a dating website. And then he just goes through the same process again, so he can see exactly what his password was. He can then hide that password, but he might want to say, you know what, I don't want to give you any information on this at all, because that's personal to me. But then it still allows you to turn around and say to Graham, actually, Graham, just letting you know, it's best practice to not use your work email address for personal use. Please, can you stop doing that? Please change the email addresses on the services that you're using. You have access to these services, which you can see on here. So again, we've got another one on here. So he's using a gambling website. Graham can see that, but you as an admin will never be able to see that. So that's everything for Tritium as a quick run through. It's really simple to use. It's very easy from an admin perspective and really easy from an end user perspective as well. Of course, I will be on hand for any demos, for any questions. If you need me to jump on with you to kind of run through any kind of guides or anything like that, more than happy to run through that with you. But hopefully this has been useful. And if we have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them now.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll do a bit of a Q&A. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat or come off mute. We'll leave the next 5 minutes for any questions. Obviously, as an account manager at ACS, we'll make sure to follow up. Next steps, as Elliot mentioned, we're able to offer demos of the platform if you want a bit more one-on-one where you can answer questions throughout. More than happy to set that up. Just let your account manager know. Also, one thing we haven't mentioned is we are able to run a bit of a free scan on your environment. Some of you might have had it already, but where we can kind of identify how much of your data is leaked. So that's something we can offer as well if that's something you wanted. But we'll leave the next 5 minutes for any questions that anyone has.
Anybody from ACS, more than welcome to ask me any questions as well, just to maybe get the kick started. So licensing works on a per user per month basis. And that's I'll leave the kind of commercials to ACS themselves, but it is on a per user per month basis, and that's on a trust basis as well. So if you think you have around 100 users working within your organization, then you can just say, look, we're going to be doing this for 100 users. Obviously, Tritium will then start to pull through that information, and then if there's a big disparity, we can then need to have a look at the licensing, but it's on a trust basis to start off with. Is this service automated or does it require manual operation? So it does require manual operation. And to start off with, when you are first using Tritium, there will be quite a lot of information that will be getting pulled through, most likely. However, the idea is that once you start remediating those issues to start off with, it's more of just a kind of a monitor every once in a while just to keep on top of it. It's not an automated process. You do need to have your kind of admin kind of manual operated process, but the same then has to apply to the end user as well, which is why it's been done that. Does it require access to Office 365? It doesn't require access to Office 365. It can you can just have the domain name. The only thing it requires is the domain name. I mentioned earlier on about the kind of verification process for emails. Now, if your mail service being set up in such a way that wouldn't necessarily allow it, maybe it will just, it might just allow any random email address. That's absolutely fine. It's just an added perk of Tritium, but it does not require access to 365. We only need to have your domain name, and it will begin scouring the dark web for them. Hopefully I've answered those questions in enough detail for you, Andrew, but feel free to ask any further up questions as well. Are multiple domain names supported per user? You can have multiple domain names, but in terms of licensing, I can't remember exactly how that will work. More than happy to take this on kind of a separate session if you want to kind of organize that through your account manager through ACS, once I've kind of understood that in a bit more detail. But yes, you can have multiple domain names per user.
I think there was another question in there, Elliot.
Any training videos available for the user element? Yes, there are. There absolutely are. So actually, let me just I'll share my screen again with you so you can see exactly what's going on. So you've got a learn more button down here for users. They can click on this and it'll be taking them to understand exactly what Tritium is and kind of understand where it's going from. You also have a help and FAQ section up here. We can go through and have a look. So how are credentials stolen? We want to understand what's being found on the dark web. What's the password best practice, things like that. It gives you lots of information. There's quite a few questions in there that people have been asking and they'd want to cover off. From an admin perspective as well, you will also have that help and support in here, and you'll also get some videos in here about how to use it. So you won't have to always necessarily rely on me to come on and say, oh, Elliot, help me, I really need help here. You can understand, right, how do you use the risk tree? And then you will have, a video that will run if you want to use that, understanding kind of around about maybe CSV data downloads, that sort of thing as well. So there's lots of information available both to the admin and to the end user there as well. Is this available as a one-off service? I think it's probably more of a commercial question for ACS rather than myself. But from my perspective, absolutely. I mean, are you talking just doing a one scan and then kind of ignoring it from then on? Because if that's the case, so if it's just a single, you wanted to do a single scan and then just get the information and take it and run, basically, that it's more used on you get licenses for 12 months. So you can use it however you like, but the minimum contract length is 12 months on that.
Give it another couple of minutes for questions.
Food trucks arrived, I hear.
Yeah, mate.
Of course, for anybody else who doesn't necessarily want to be putting the questions into the chat, feel free to get in contact with your account manager and just ask them who they can then get in contact with me, and I can answer it for you both. Otherwise, more than happy to jump on another session with you and run through this in more detail. I'm more than happy to do that. Always have the time for you guys. That's not a matter of, oh, try and squeeze it in my calendar. No, I will dedicate the time to you because that's what I'm here for. Use and abuse me. That's what I always say. That's what I'm here for. If you were to do all of the security recommendations suggested after a scan, would you see a need to have this ongoing past the 12-month commitment? Yes, absolutely. The reason for that is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the slides, the there are data breaches that are happening every single day. So it's all about that continuous monitoring and continuous understanding of where the data breaches are happening. Now that I think in terms of 2022 alone, I know Tritium has identified over, I think, closing on about 1,000 breaches in 2022 alone. I know, I can't remember off the top of my head how many it was last month, but it was about 200 or something was found last month. So you can see from that, it's not just one data breach happening a day or maybe a few a week. It's it's multiple per day and hundreds a month that's happening. And as I mentioned, Tritium's monitoring for over 9,000 as it is, and it's just that number is constantly increasing. And not only that, but each time it's finding new information, it's finding hundreds of thousands of user records as well. So Tritium's actually looking at around 11 billion, well, just shy of 11 billion records. One thing to note around that, as I'm kind of also have it in my mind, if you were to go into Have I Been Pwned, one of the things they'll say is, oh, we're doing, we're able to monitor 12, 13 billion records. What's happening is Have I Been Pwned is missing out the data cleansing stage that Tritium is going through. And what's happening is there's a credential dump that will go through. So you have multiple different data breaches that have been found in a credential dump. Someone's just added some information onto that. And they said, look, I'm giving you all this other information as a bit of an add-on here. I'm trying to sell this. I'm just trying to make more money. What Have I Been Pwned will do is see all those records in a single credential dump and say, this is all new data. Whereas Tritium's actually going through that data saying, no, actually, this is old information. We've already seen this. So that's what Tritium's looking at, is just shy of 11 billion unique records. Whereas Have I Been Pwned will be going through and actually saying, this is all new to me. Which is how they're able to say that they're doing 12, 13 billion with only 600 breaches compared to Tritium's 9,000 breaches, but just shy of 11 billion. So that's very important to understand that perspective. But yes, absolutely, I do see this as a service that needs to go on, beyond the 12-month commitment because just of how many data breaches are happening, and you hear them all the time in the news.
Cool. Well, I think that might be it for the questions then, unless anyone's got any more. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. Us at ACS will make sure to follow up. If we can action anything before we do follow up, such as pricing, that free scan, or another demo with Elliot, a bit of one-to-one on the Tritium. Oh, we've got one more question.
What is size and location of Tritium as a company? So Tritium's actually owned by Threat Status, who in themselves are owned by a company called Crossword Cybersecurity, who are a PLC based in London. So the overall size of Crossword, I think they're about 250 big, something like that. The team dedicated to Tritium is actually quite a bit smaller. They recently got bought out by Crossword, but they're adding more people on as time goes by. But there's the team's growing, but it's very much focused on the Tritium platform itself. So you're looking at maybe Tritium themselves, probably I think about 30, 40, something like that.
We'll give it to 22 actually.
Sounds like a good idea. Because
Yeah.
I think people would just think, oh, actually, I've just thought about this. Of course, for anybody who wants any additional information, any data sheets, anything like that, feel free to get in touch with the guys at ACS. They do have these available that they can send out to you so you can have a read through. I think they might have already done that. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think I was speaking to Sarah about that. They might have already gone to you guys. But if you haven't got that, please speak to your account manager. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to provide that to you. So you can just have a bit of a refresh. And like we said, this session has been recorded. So we can have, if you want to have another look back through this, you're more than welcome to. You get to hear my lovely voice furthermore. But yeah, feel free to just have a kind of look through this again if you need it, and of course provide to your wider team. Is there automation on the product development plan? There is to some degree. However, they're keeping it quite quiet about what that's going to look like. I had a conversation internally with them not long ago. It was about 2 months ago, and there is an element of automation that they're looking at, but they're just currently in the early stages of that. They're trying to work out what that will look like because we still need some form of kind of input, especially from the user end, so they need to see exactly what that will look like from further down the line. But it is on the product development plan, but there's no kind of ETA on that as yet.
What time is it? Quarter 2 we're running to?
We've got until quarter 2, absolutely. So I'm happy to sit on for another 5 minutes if there's any other questions. We seem to.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll sit on for another 5 minutes. Answer any more questions you have. And go from there.
Is there a limit to how often it can be used? Nope, no limit at all. Log in, send as many alerts out. Like I said earlier on, it's priced on a per user per month basis. So that's what you're paying for. The rest of it, just feel free to send out. One thing I should mention as well is that the data gets refreshed every 24 hours. So every day is new information will get pulled through, and you can use it to your heart's content. There's absolutely no need for or any limit on how often it can be used. Okay, so first off, we've got how long does it take to receive reports from the trawl? It's when you kind of first pull the information through, it is about 2 to 3 hours. It can be less than that, but I believe that's what they're saying is the usual estimate is about 2 to 3 hours. But once it's kind of that's happening, you're getting pulled through information every 24 hours after that. But the initial burst is about 2 to 3 hours there. Can you pick and choose who you want the scan to be for example, director level or VIPs only? No, so it's going to be scanning for the entire domain. So you can't just specifically say, can we just look for a specific email address? We're looking across the whole domain there, because the idea being that you're looking and protecting the whole organization, because the risk is the same. It doesn't matter if the risk, if it's at director level or VIPs, someone who is working as an admin or even a receptionist, the risk to them is almost maybe more so, because they're going to be receiving countless numbers of emails, and it can only be one, bad email that will come through that they'll maybe just type in the wrong password, and they might be using loads of different passwords. So it's very much, the risk is across the whole company, and that's why we're looking at the whole domain there. It's great to see we've got so many questions coming in, though. It's obviously getting a lot of attention from everyone. So if the licensing is per user, how does that work? So it is based on what we're expecting to see. Like I mentioned earlier on, it's on a trust basis. So we can't just define, right, it's going to be a cutoff at 100 users. That's kind of very much, this is the amount of users that we're expecting to come through here, because this is how many people we're employing. It is, like I said, on a trust basis there. So just as an estimate, we'll just start off with, and then you can refine that when it comes to renewal once you understand what we're dealing with. But yeah, it is on a trust basis. So we, please give us a truthful amount.
This is the most amount of questions from a webinar ever, Elliot, by the way.
Good to hear. Must be doing something right then. Yeah. No, dark web scanning is one of those things that quite a lot of people are sort of talking about, and they're starting to think about, but they haven't really ventured into it. So I think for a lot of people, this is their first foray into dark web scanning, and it's great to see so many questions, because it means people are thinking about it. They're wanting to understand more kind of around that. But yeah, very interesting and scary. I'm hoping that's not around the licensing model, but yeah, the whole product is the whole thing is actually quite scary from a dark web scanning perspective. It is interesting to know. But Andrew, happy to take this offline if you want to have a bit of a further discussion around that. If you want, and if you've got time later today or tomorrow, I'm free all week, so feel free to get in touch with your account manager. We can schedule in a call.
I think we'll call it there then, I suppose.
Perfect.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Elliot. Thanks, everyone, for joining that's still in. We'll make sure to follow up on our side. If we can action anything beforehand, feel free to get in touch with your account manager here at ACS. And of course, with the recording as well, we'll send that through on request. So, yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cool.
Been a pleasure.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.